Hello, everyone, and welcome to Book Study 7 of Unfolding Consciousness, Exploring the Living Universe and the Intelligent Powers in Nature and Humans. This is a mammoth text, over 1,000 pages, a labor of love that has taken over 20 years to put together. And we're doing Volume 1, which is a panoramic survey, science contrasted with the perennial philosophy on consciousness and man. We are still in the very beginning of this book. We haven't even hit the main text. But what I'm going to do is just read it to you in tiny little chunks so we can all kind of get a taste and study this together. I hope to be more interactive with you. I highly encourage you to write your comments down below. I will send them on to Eddie. We'd love to have discussions with you and live broadcasts and all kinds of stuff. But we got to start somewhere, because we only do like a page and a half an episode. We do one episode a week. That's going to be years, but it's important that this text is available to all. So we're going to be doing the foreword by David Lorimer today. And then when we get into Eddie's actual text, what I'm going to do is I'm going to translate it in my own words and to the best of my understanding at the beginning of each episode. And then at the end, I will actually read Eddie's actual text so you have access to the pure writings. So right now, let's begin with a foreword from David Lorimer, and let's get started. Book Study 7. Here we go. David writes, "You hold in your hand a magisterial treatise, the fruit of a lifetime of careful study and reflection by a man who is also a consulting engineer and a concert-level pianist, inspired not only by Liszt and Beethoven, but also in the context of this work by Sir Isaac Newton and Erwin Schrödinger, whose scope as scientist and thinker was far greater and deeper than commonly understood. A glance through the detailed contents of 3 volumes, there's actually 4 volumes, 3 volumes main, there's a 4th one that is a reference manual, immediately gives the reader an impression of its comprehensive approach to the subject matter, of what a human being is and what life is about. Culturally, we are dominated, especially in the West, by science and technology with its prevailing philosophy that mind is an emergent property of matter, and that everything can or will ultimately be explained in material terms. To doubt this proposition is to risk branding as a heretic and undermine one's reputation as a serious scientist, as many have found to their cost. Notably in our time, Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, Nobel laureate Professor Brian Josephson, FRS, Dr. Peter Fenwick, and Dr. Eben Alexander, among many others. This tendency is not new and can also be exemplified in the 19th century by attacks on such leading scientists as Sir William Crookes, FRS, and President of the Royal Society Sir Oliver Lodge, FRS, Alfred Russel Wallace, FRS, and Sir William Barrett, FRS, for their active interest in psychical research. The Theosophical Society was also founded in this era, in 1875, and its 3 declared objects are highly relevant to this study, especially as the author has drawn deeply on this tradition, which he knows very well. 1. To form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. 2. To encourage the comparative study of religion, philosophy, and science. 3. To investigate unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in humanity. The 2nd and 3rd objects are particularly relevant here in the author's quest to bring together into a coherent framework key findings of religion, philosophy, and science, as well as investigating unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in humanity in terms of subtle anatomy, going beyond brain and physical body and exerting causal influence from the inside out. Our current scientific tendency is to examine everything from the outside in and assume that causality also operates in this manner, in that matter gives rise to mind and brain to consciousness. Historically, this reflects the 17th century classification of quantitative and measurable aspects of reality as primary and qualitative or subjective aspects as secondary. As Michael Ishleman points out in his book, The Restitution of Man in 1983, this has momentous consequences in terms of what is now known as scientism, that is, materialism as an ideology. The ultimate effect of scientism is to dissolve the absolute qualitative distinction between persons and things, the very heart of the metaphysical tradition of sapientia. That means to devote oneself to philosophy. Sapientia. Reducing persons to things, denying man's rational soul and his transcendence of the physical, giving him a value no higher than that of a camel or a stone or of any other part of nature. This reduction of the human category to the natural runs parallel with a whole series of reductions, from quality to quantity, from value to fact, from rational to empirical. Scientists tend to take this new perspective for granted unless they become aware that scientism is in fact philosophy, not science. One cannot get away from metaphysics. As Aldous Huxley observed in his book Ends and Means in 1937, it is impossible to live without metaphysics. The choice that is given is not between some kind of metaphysics and no metaphysic. It is always between a good metaphysic and a bad metaphysic. What the author has in mind in this work is a more adequate and comprehensive metaphysic. In his seminal work, published in 1924, The Metaphysical Foundations of Modern Science, E. A. Burt observes that just as it was thoroughly natural for medieval thinkers to view nature as subservient to man's knowledge, purpose, and destiny, so now it has become natural to view her as existing and operating in her own self-contained independence. And so far as the ultimate relationship to her is clear at all, to consider his knowledge and purpose somehow produced by and wholly dependent on her. Natural in this context means normal and take it for granted. Taking up this point, the historian and Orientalist Patricia Crone, quoted in Sufism by Alexander Knish, says, "People see things from their own perspective. Much of what they say adds up to comforting ideas or outright propaganda for themselves and the groups to which they belong. They believe their own propaganda because they cannot see that this is what it is. The bias is invisible because the angle which produces it is felt as normal, not as a perspective peculiar to a special group. You cannot see it unless you stand outside it." This is not surprising. As the historian Marshall Hodgson observes, scholarly pre-commitments manifest themselves in the questions the scholar poses and in the type of category he uses, where indeed bias is especially hard to track down because it is hard to suspect the very terms one uses, which seem so innocently neutral. The key phrase is the last one, innocently neutral, as the lens through which one peers is naively assumed to represent underlying reality, when it is precisely that, an abstract representation or model. A good example from modern neuroscience and philosophy is the formulation by the cognitive science and philosopher David Chalmers of the hard problem of consciousness, where he asks how the brain generates consciousness, thus implicitly assuming that the brain does in fact generate consciousness, which may not in fact be true, as William James pointed out over 100 years ago, when he observed that the relationship between brain and consciousness might not be productive, meaning the brain produces consciousness, but rather transmissive or permissive. The brain transmits or permits consciousness, a view becoming more popular among cutting-edge neuroscientists and philosophers, represented in such scholarly books emanating from the University of Virginia as Irreducible Mind and Beyond Physicalism. The philosopher and mathematician Alfred North Whitehead, FRS, FBA, was well aware of the relationship between science and philosophy. Modern scholarship and modern science reproduce the same limitations as dominated by the bygone Hellenistic people and the bygone scholastic epoch. They canalize thought and observation within predetermined limits based upon inadequate metaphysical assumptions dogmatically assumed. The modern assumptions differ from older assumptions, not wholly for the better. They exclude from rationalistic thought more of the final values of existence. His key point is that the underlying philosophy or metaphysical assumptions constitute the predetermined limits he refers to, and these are dogmatically, mostly unconsciously assumed. As C.G. Jung also warned when he said the basic error of every worldview is its remarkable tendency to pretend to be the truth of things themselves, whereas it is actually only a name which we give to things. Hence, an explanation, literally an unfolding, can only reflect the assumptions implicit in the question, as already noted in the example above of the hard problem of consciousness. Whitehead introduces an important distinction relevant to this study between what he calls the observational order and the conceptual order. The observational order is constituted by the direct, immediate discriminations of particular observations, while the conceptual order is constituted by our general way of conceiving the universe. The central point here is that the observational order is invariably interpreted in the terms of the concepts supplied by the conceptual order. We inherit in observational order, namely types of things which we do in fact discriminate. And we inherit conceptual order, namely a rough system of ideas, in terms of which we do in fact interpret. The reader will find in these volumes a thoroughgoing and justifiably polemical critique of the conceptual order supplied by scientism, as well as a systematic elaboration of a deeper and a more comprehensive conceptual order based on the author's understanding of occult science and the principles of the perennial philosophy. Distinctive features of this work are comprehensive accounts of universality of the perennial wisdom from the East and the West, ancient and modern, their self-consistent philosophy and methodology, and the manner in which they reveal the hidden laws and processes of nature that throw light on such ideas as paranormal phenomena, the subtle bodies of a human being, evolution considered from the mental and spiritual perspectives, death as transition and not extinction of consciousness, and most importantly, the nature of mind and the unfolding of consciousness from the implicate order to explication in the world of matter. The result is the reestablishment of the dignity of the human being and human life beyond the reductionist and mechanical categories of modern science. Importantly, this includes purpose, a category removed with Aristotle's final causes when science decided to focus on the instrumental and efficient causality of how, while at the same time eliminating the possibility of an ultimate why, thus effectively removing the qualitative and subjective aspect of human life that is consciousness itself. The irony not lost on such thinkers as Mary Midgley and Rupert Sheldrake is that the formulation of scientific theories presupposes consciousness, as Descartes implicitly realized in his famous cogito, I think, therefore I am. During the 1990s, the author was a key member of the Science and Esoteric Knowledge Group of the Scientific and Medical Network. I will add the website for the Scientific and Medical Network here, so you can check that out. The work of this group sought to extend the metaphysical framework of science to include consciousness, spirituality, and so-called paranormal phenomena that are not amenable to materialistic explanations. In the brilliant analysis and exposition of this well-illustrated and fully referenced work, the reader will find a comprehensive explanation of how religion and spirituality, science and philosophy can complement each other. He provides a systematic metaphysical framework that extends rather than contradicts science and its spirit. In doing so, he overcomes the limitations of materialistic scientism to introduce a wider and deeper context that is also meaningful in the terms of the nature of human life. In this sense, this work is a magnificent work of metaphysical reconstruction and moral reorientation, a vital enterprise in our era of rising mental distress, arguably correlated with the idea that economic prosperity and celebrity are the royal highways to happiness, and that human life is merely a chance accident in an ultimately meaningless universe. The author demonstrates that this view is very limited and partial, providing a firmer and a more extensive basis for a positive philosophy of life. As he himself explains, one, nature is not simply a fortuitous concurrence of atoms that happen to self-assemble themselves, according to blind mechanical laws in the fullness of time. Two, since there are invisible and unseen worlds all under the governance of divine law that have barely been understood or approached by modern science. And three, moreover, there is an accumulated and uninterpreted wisdom that constitutes the archaic truths, which are the basis of all religions and sciences since antiquity to present day. Prepare to embark on an intellectual and spiritual odyssey that will open up new vistas and immensely enhance your understanding of many branches of science and philosophy, as well as the perennial philosophy and the deeper aspects of esotericism, symbolism, mythology, and allegory. I know of no other work of such scope and depth relating to the ultimate questions raised by human existence, both in terms of our origins and destiny. That's David Lorimer. He's the chair of the Galileo Commission and international program director of the Scientific and Medical Network. He's also the editor of Paradigm Explorer since 1986 and author and editor of over a dozen books, most recently, A Quest for Wisdom. Now, if you've made it this far, thank you for sticking around. I did not translate David's forward because I didn't feel I could. I wanted him to be able to be natural and free. I will translate Eddie's work just to make it a little bit more palatable if you are new to this subject. And then I will include his actual work at the end. But David's, so beautiful. And thank you for bearing with me. I'm doing the best that I can. This is a substantial text. This is Unfolding Consciousness, Exploring the Living Universe, and the Intelligent Powers in Nature and Humans. He's put this together. He's explained it. It's all together synthesized with all of these graphs and pictures. It is a phenomenal text. It should be in every library all over the world. But how do we do that? How do we get that out there? I thought, why not start right here on the Voice of Compassion channel, formerly Living Theosophy. Theosophy is in here. Isaac Newton is in here. Albert Einstein is in here. Paul Brunton is in here. They're all in here. And it is something I believe that if we take what is in here and we understand it to the best of our ability, and then we take that and we apply it to our daily lives. This is not just to sit around and read whenever, just and put it away. It's not just to go to school and memorize it. It's to apply it. And once we put it into self-application, we begin to take a look at ourselves. What do we need to do differently? How do we adapt to certain things? How do we overcome our lower self? The self that is, it's the loudest one, and it's greed, it's ignorance, superstition, fear, jealousy, rage, all that. And then how do we overcome that? And then what do we put in place of it? And if we all took responsibility for ourselves and worked towards self-transformation, then the whole world can change, but we can't change anybody else. We can only change ourselves. This is the most important collection of the ancient teachings I have ever seen. I am 56 years of age, and I just want to be able to get them out there. So we'll begin with Eddie's text coming up next week. So until then, thank you for being here. And if you'd like to, you can download. There is a transcript down below. You can also see the closed captions. Hopefully they're doing okay with that. And then, of course, I'll put links to the actual text. We're working on audio versions, abridged versions, paperback versions, ebooks, and all that. So thank you for being here. I love you very much. I have much hope for humanity. And you, if you are here at this far into the video, if you've stayed till the end, you are definitely a part of that. I love you. I'll see you next time.